Hi there, welcome to Gnostic Vlog Confessio 22. 22 gives the idea of balance, to my way of thinking. I think of Libra and I think of the dynamic equilibrium, which all things are in this world and in the worlds of the demiurge. So you see, it's not all bad. um, And certainly, as far as our situation is concerned, our general situation here in the world of the demiurge, there's no doubt that you have to strike a balance generally. And in particular, you have to strike a balance between theory on one hand and practice on the other. And however, I do find theory quite comforting. And that sort of leads to the main point of this vlog. Um, and I think practice is necessary. You've got to really train your mind. You've got to really get those horses and that pulling the carriage correctly. And that comes with practice, and that comes with dedication and commitment, and all the good things like that, which I also think strengthens you. Which will bring me on to the point of this vlog as well. And I was thinking about depression the other day. And of course, there is obviously our situational depression that we may get, depressed about our people we're in relationship with, persons, circumstances, and general situation, of course. Now, of course, the thing about personal depression is that there's all this sort of cognitive behavior therapy, and there's a cognitive aspect to this. For example, we may have false beliefs about our situation and about other people and about circumstances, beliefs that are not substantiated by evidence. And when you look at the evidence which supports your belief, you find that your belief is not justified, and your belief may be pulling you down in terms of mood, and there's no need for it because it is actually you've actually misunderstood the whole situation. And of course, there's misperception. I mean, you can see things. I also think that you can buy into the misperception of others, and this can actually bring down your mood as well. And then finally, there's misconception. You can actually not really understand situations and people and circumstances, and think that they're more negative than actually are. So I think misconception, misperception, and beliefs can contribute very, very significantly to the situational depression that we find ourselves in as individuals. But I mean, closely allied to this, I think, I also think there's a certain thing called universal depression as well, universal sorrow, to put it in Buddhist terms. And that may have something to do with our own personal depression, but I also think it's a depression that we also have of the world itself and of our general situation in the worlds of the demiurge. And these may not be misconceived or misperceived or even be based on beliefs. They could actually be completely right. And indeed, there is a lot to be depressed about. There's a lot to be sorrowful about within this universe. It is a vale of tears and sorrow. And so when I sort of was thinking about introspecting, and I was thinking about depression. While I felt depressed, my mood was down. So the first thing to do really was to sort of convert my own situational depression to a universal depression, to universalize it, as it were, to take it out of the particular of me, and put it into the general, which is also us, as it were, includes you and me. and everybody. And and certain situations obviously have arisen in recent decades in this century to warrant a depression and a sort of bitter, sad view of the world. And why not, sort of thing. But instead of being sort of a self-indulgent depression, as it were, I kind of universalized it on the one hand, but then I also breathed into it into another, because the universal and the particular depression are very intertwined, as I've shown in this sort of diagram. There's two kinds of depression, and they're very interlinked with each other. And they may or may not be justified, but the point is that you can also breathe into the depression. And once you started to breathe into depression, you can also start to focus on the voice of the silence, and to go within, go deep within, and in that way you're building up layers of the effects of meditation, which I've indicated here, in the same way that a South Sea pearl builds up a mixture of protein and calcium carbonate around the internal irritant, which apparently has nothing to do with bits of sand or grain. That's a myth, apparently. It is, in fact, caused by perhaps an endoparasite, which enters the creature and causes an internal irritation, or even slow infection. And the layers of pearl, which are built up over years, are part of the defense mechanism of the pearl, of the creature itself. And so I can imagine, that we do the purifying breath, and we do we do various positive affirmations and prayers to God, and we introspect, and we go into ourselves, and we go to a very calm, quiet place. Because I've noticed that you get people sometimes think depression is a sort of flat line, but my impression of depression is that it's actually quite a jagged line. It's actually quite it sort of hides an agitation. I mean, it looks like it's a flatliner kind of situation, but in fact, there's a lot of agitation and frustration underneath depression. And I think that can be modulated. That can be, it can be ironed out to a nice, smooth, sort of sine wave, which follows the breath and follows a calm set of vibrations in the mind. And so in this way, you build up layers of the effects of meditation, until in fact you are building a pearl. In fact, you are finding a pearl in your heart, and that pearl represents self-knowledge, because the principal point of self-knowledge, the conclusion of self-knowledge, is that you are self, you are soul, you are not this depression, for example. And from that conclusion, soul awareness arises, which, as I said, is a precursor to God awareness, and a precursor for laying down the basis of further metaphysical evolution of consciousness, to a point where when you leave this world physically, you can enter into eternity with a different mental vibration than the one you have now. And so you go beyond depression, you go beyond fear, you go beyond frustration, you go beyond rage. You go beyond all the limitations of body and mind, and you go into the limitless light. And the pearl, of course, is lustrous and beautiful to behold. And there was one recently sold for $1.5 million, because it was such a prize. They're very rare. So, of course, it's very rare to build up these layers of the results of meditation. And it takes many years of doing so. You're sort of following an internal alchemy. And the thing about alchemy is that it always takes a very, very long, long time to do anything in alchemy. It's a bit like the Ents in Tolkien. If something is worth saying, it takes a very, very long time to say. And in fact, you have to think about things a lot before you say anything. And in alchemy, it's almost like the conditions and the elements of alchemy take a very, very long to think about things before they actually do anything. Well, they're doing things, but there's very, very, very sort of relaxed and very laid back way, and completely opposite to the way that we behave in the West nowadays, with everything instant, instant. These things don't they're not instant. They take a very long time. So alchemy comes from practice as well. You have to practice alchemy as well as know the theory by heart. But also, I think the theory is very comforting in its own right. Sometimes I just like to listen to Stefan Heuler and his talks and his homilies on Ecclesiastica Gnostica. Um, I find it just comforting to go over the theory over and over again and keep on sort of when he talks about soul and spirituality and soul awareness and God awareness. It's just nice to go over the theory a lot, really. I mean, apart from anything, you pick up different parts of the theory according to your need at the time. But it's just very comforting to be constantly reminded of the truth. And so this is part of one's practice, in fact. Okay, you have to go into introspection and positivity, and you have to go into calmness and listen to the voice, listen for the voice of the silence, make yourself open to the effects or the causes of gnosis even, and to gnosis itself. And then, and that goes with the theory, so the practice is important. But sometimes it's hard to practice with so much distraction, with so much universal sorrow inside one, linked as it is to one's individual sorrow and individual depression. That it's hard to practice, and so sometimes you have to keep going back to the theory on which the practice is based, and that's no bad thing to do. I suppose the theory is passive. You're absorbing the theory on one hand, and the practice is positive, is active, where you're acting on the theory and on the methodology that arises from that theory. But of course, the methodology also has to be flexible, and it also changes according to circumstances and situations and relationships with people. And that's part of it as well. But things, for example, some things are quite good. I got a project with my partner, which is to go through the 80 sayings of de Saint Martin, 80 aphorisms on spirituality. And we're going to go through them, and we're going to do one or three things. Either we're going to say this saying is irrelevant to the modern age, and we can delete it happily. The other is to read against the text, which basically means that you take the words of the aphorism and basically reinterpret those words according to your life situation and according to the needs of modernity and of society at the time. And the other thing is you can take a spiritual truth and you just rewrite the words so that a modern audience can understand what is being said, because de Saint Martin's aphorisms were written in High French in the 17th century, and maybe they may be very well translated, but they appear to me to be quite a mouthful and very, very sort of elevated language, which most people, 90% of people, can't actually follow nowadays. And you do have to, quotation marks, dumb it down for people to understand, because what is important is the vernacular. It's important that the truth gets out there, and so it's necessary to rewrite material for a modern audience without losing the essential message of the original material. You see, which is actually a lot more difficult than you might imagine. And of course, a lot more risky than you might imagine. But I think it's a risk worth taking, and I think it's a project worth pursuing. So every week or every day, my partner and I will take these aphorisms and we will go with them and run with them, and discuss them, and rewrite them if necessary, for a more modern audience, and for our own benefit as well, really as well. So that's one thing. So that's when a theory or when a study becomes a practice, because you're doing a study every day. And that has a practical application because you're going to make information available to a modern audience who otherwise would just say, "Whoa, what's all this? We don't understand it. We're just going to switch off." Um, so, um, 22 is about the number of balance. I think it's a nice balance number. The balance of Libra, the scales on one hand, but the dynamic equilibrium that exists in nature on the other. And, you know, and I think depression arises, that's natural, and universal depression arises. Universal sorrow is something which you can go into, which arises, and you can go into this with your breath, and with your silence, and possibly with the voice of the silence arising. And you can build layers of meditation or practice around your depression, both personal and universal. And this will actually create a pearl, create something of great beauty, and of great wisdom. The pearl represents wisdom. And you can actually create a beautiful gem, of practice and theory and self-knowledge, arising from your natural response to this universal depression, which is introspection, meditation, contemplation, mantra, prayer, and music, and even incense, even colors. Lots of things can contribute to not combating universal sorrow so much, as making it calmer, making it less agitated, making it less, I don't know, perhaps less personal, and more impersonal. And finally, when I practice this myself, I have this feeling, that universal sorrow, linked as it is to my own personal sorrow and depression, can become a very sweet sort of thing. It feels like a very sweet, beautiful, a beautiful, sweet kind of melody or chord progression, which is actually in the major scale. A major is normally associated with cheerful, upbeat things, and minor scale is to do with doom and gloom. But I think that the minor scale of music is very, how can I say this? It's sometimes it's very overdone. It's sort of melodramatic. It's self-indulgent. Whereas sometimes the major scale can actually be very beautiful and very sad, and very heroic. And so I have this idea of depression being expressed in a major scale as one's heroic struggle against the darkness, and heroic struggle to find the inner light, and to act upon that inner light. And so there's a sweet, poignant flavour to the depression, once it's been treated with introspection and meditation, as it were. You can sort of change the colour of it, and making it from dull, into something beautiful and lustrous as the pearl itself.